Come closer, my children. Sit by the fire, for the story I am about to tell you is not a whisper in the wind, it is written in the blood of the earth. Today, Ogume stands strong, but there was a time when the sky wept and the ground shook. This is the story of how peace was bought with a price too heavy to carry. It begins in the green lands of the Delta, where the soil is rich and dark, and the yam tubers grow as thick as a man's thigh. The people of Ogume were farmers. They understood the language of the rain and the secrets of the harvest. They did not seek war. They woke up early to the crow of the rooster and returned late with backs bent from honest work. Laughter filled the village square, and the smell of roasting corn drifted through the evening air. It was a good life. It was a quiet life. But you know, my children, that quiet things are easily broken. Trouble did not knock on the door, it walked in boldly from the forest. It came in the form of strangers, herdsmen from the far north. They brought cattle that were numerous, like ants covering sugar. These beasts knew no boundaries. They did not care for the sweat of the farmer or the hunger of the village children. They only saw green leaves, and they ate until the green was gone. The destruction was slow at first, like a small leak in a canoe. A few rows of cassava trampled today, a basket of vegetables eaten tomorrow. But soon, the leak became a flood. The herdsmen grew bold. They did not just pass through, they stayed. They camped on the farmlands, and their cattle turned the beautiful gardens into fields of grey dust and dung. The farmers of Ogume went to their farms in the morning, only to find their hard work destroyed. Tears began to flow in the households of Ogume. A man who cannot feed his family feels a fire in his belly that is hotter than hunger. It is the fire of shame and anger. The young men of the village clenched their fists. They looked at their machetes, not as tools for farming, but as weapons for war. They whispered in the corners of the market, speaking of revenge. Let us drive them out, they hissed. Let us make them pay. But the elders were wise. They had seen war before, and they knew that war leaves nothing standing, not the victor, and not the defeated. The king of Ogume raised his hand and called for silence. We will not shed blood first, he declared. We will ask them to live in peace. We will show them the road, and we will protect our name. The decision was made, though many hearts were heavy with doubt. The king sent messengers to the herdsmen. The message was clear but respectful: this land can no longer hold us both. Please, take your cattle and go, so that we may not fight. Surprisingly, the herdsmen agreed. They nodded their heads and gathered their things. It seemed too easy, my children. And when things seem too easy in the bush, you must watch where you step, for there is likely a trap. To ensure that the herdsmen actually left the land of Ogume, the king decided to send an escort. He needed strong men, men who could walk for miles without tiring, men who could command respect with just a look. He did not send the old, and he did not send the very young. He called for the youth. He called for the brave. 24 young men stepped forward. They were the pride of the village. Their muscles were like twisted ropes, and their eyes were clear. Among them was a leader, a boy of only 19 years, but with the spirit of a lion. He was not the biggest, but he had a quiet power that made others follow him. The village looked at these 24 boys and saw hope. They did not know they were looking at a sacrifice. Before they could leave on this dangerous mission, there was something that had to be done. You see, the road is full of eyes that you cannot see, and the enemy you trust is often the one holding the knife. The elders knew that these boys were walking into the unknown. They could not send them out with just their bare skin. They needed insurance. They needed the protection of the ancestors. In the dead of night, under the light of a half-moon, the 24 youths were taken to the sacred grove. This is a place where the trees are so old they have faces, and the air is thick with the smell of roots and herbs. The native doctor, a man whose skin was wrinkled like dried leather, awaited them. A large pot bubbled over a fire that burned with a strange, blue flame. They were to be cooked. This is not the cooking of food, my children. This is the fortification of the spirit and the body. The doctor dipped leaves into the boiling mixture and washed the boys. He made small incisions on their chest and rubbed black powder into the wounds. The boys did not flinch. They stood like statues, letting the power enter their blood. They were being turned into iron. They were being prepared to face thunder and lightning without burning. The ritual lasted until the first light of dawn touched the sky. When the boys emerged from the grove, they looked different. They were the same height, the same color, but there was a heaviness about them. When they walked, the ground seemed to vibrate. They had been given the ultimate protection, Odeshi. This means, it does not leak. It meant that no bullet could pierce their skin. No metal fueled by gunpowder could harm them. The leader of the group, the 19-year-old boy, received something extra. Because he would be at the front, because he carried the weight of the group, the doctor gave him a double fortification. He was protected not just against bullets, but against knives, spears, and arrows. His skin was made to be as impenetrable as the shell of a tortoise, yet as soft to the touch as silk. He felt invincible. He felt that nothing in this world could stop him. But the doctor gave them a warning, as all powerful charms come with conditions. Do not fear the noise of the gun, he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves crushing. But remember, you are still flesh and blood underneath. Do not let arrogance blind you. Walk the path of truth, and the iron will hold. The boys nodded. They felt ready to challenge death itself. The morning of the departure was grey and misty. The village gathered to see them off. Mothers held the hands of their sons, squeezing tight, their eyes filled with that special fear that only a mother knows. Wives stood silently by their husbands, holding babies that were too young to understand why their fathers were leaving. The air was thick with unsaid goodbyes. We will be back before the sun sets, the young leader promised his mother. He adjusted the amulet around his neck, a small leather pouch that contained the heart of the protection. His mother forced a smile, but her hands trembled as she straightened his collar. She looked at his faded Brazil jersey, torn in places, and wished she had mended it. Go well, my son, she whispered. May the road rise to meet you. The 24 youths gathered their staffs. They carried no guns, for they were a peaceful escort. They carried only big sticks, carved from strong wood, to guide the cattle and to walk the rough paths. The herdsmen were waiting at the edge of the village, their faces hidden under turbans, their eyes hard to read. They looked submissive, ready to be led. It was a perfect picture of cooperation. But pictures, my children, can lie. The journey began. The procession was long, hundreds of cattle moving slowly, their hoofs kicking up dust, followed by the herdsmen, and flanked by the 24 Ogume guardians. They moved out of the populated areas, past the last huts, and onto the tarred road that led away from civilization. The sun began to climb higher, burning off the mist, and the heat rose from the asphalt in shimmering waves. For the first hour, everything was calm. The herdsmen spoke little, only clicking their tongues to direct the cows. The Ogume boys walked with their heads high, confident in their strength. They joked among themselves in low voices, talking about the food they would eat when they returned, talking about the girls they wanted to marry. They were young, and life stretched out before them like an endless river. But as they walked further, the landscape changed. The farms gave way to thick, tangled rainforests on both sides. The trees grew tall and close together, blocking out the sun and casting long, dark shadows across the road. The swampy smell of stagnant water filled the air. This was the wild part of the land, a place where the road was full of potholes and the silence was heavy. It was a place where a scream would simply be swallowed by the trees. They reached the stretch of road known to the locals as the Silent Mile. It was a desolate corridor between towns. If a car broke down here, the driver would pray to the heavens, for no help would come for hours. On this day, the road was completely empty. No trucks carrying timber, no motorcycles, no travelers. It was just the boys, the herdsmen, and the cows. The world felt held explicitly still, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. The leader of the Ogume boys felt a prickle on the back of his neck. It was the instinct of the hunter, the sixth sense that warns a deer when the leopard is near. He looked at the herdsmen. Their body language had changed. They were no longer walking with the slump of defeat. Their backs were straight. Their hands were hovering near the folds of their robes. He signaled to his brothers with a small wave of his hand. Be alert. The 24 boys tightened their grips on their wooden staffs. The air grew thick with tension, heavy and electric. The cattle seemed to sense it too. They began to low nervously, tossing their heads. The rhythm of the walk broke. The footsteps faltered. The truce was dissolving like sugar in hot water. Suddenly, the herdsmen stopped. They were deep in the wilderness now, far from any ear that could hear a distress call. The leader of the herdsmen turned around. He did not smile. There was no gratitude in his eyes for the safe escort. There was only cold, hard malice. He let out a sharp whistle, a sound that cut through the humid air like a knife. In a unified movement, the herdsmen reached into their robes. They did not pull out cola nuts or water bottles. They pulled out automatic rifles. The metal glinted in the patches of sunlight. The ambush had been planned all along. They had never intended to live peacefully. They had just waited until they had the boys exactly where they wanted them, isolated, unarmed, and exposed. Run, one of the younger Ogume boys shouted, his voice cracking with fear. But where could they run? To the left was the swamp, deep and treacherous. To the right was the thick, thorny forest. Behind them and in front of them were men with machines designed to kill. The 24 stood their ground. They remembered the ritual. They remembered the hot pot and the doctor's words. Iron. They were iron. The command was given in a language the boys did not understand, and the herdsmen opened fire. Rat-tat-tat-tat. The sound was deafening, shattering the silence of the forest. Smoke filled the air, smelling of sulfur and death. The herdsmen aimed directly at the chests and heads of the Ogume youths, expecting to see them fall like cut grass. They expected blood to spray and bodies to crumble. But then, the impossible happened. The bullets struck the boys, yes. But they did not penetrate. Instead of tearing through flesh, the bullets flattened against their skins and fell to the ground. Clean. 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 It sounded like heavy rain falling on a tin roof. Sparks flew from the chest of the boys as if they were made of solid granite. The leader of the Ogume boys stood at the front, his arms spread wide. A volley of bullets hit him, pushing him back slightly with their force, but he did not bleed. He did not fall. He looked down at his chest, saw the torn jersey, but saw no wound. The fear in his heart vanished, replaced by a roar of triumph. The charm was real. The gods of Ogume were with them. We are invincible, he shouted. The herdsmen stopped firing, confusion written all over their faces. They checked their guns. They looked at the bullets on the floor. This was not normal. This was not something they had ever seen. In all their raids, in all their battles, men always fell when shot. But these boys stood there, shaking the dust off their bodies, unharmed. Panic began to flicker in the eyes of the attackers. It is juju, one herdsman screamed, stepping back. The scene on the road was like a fireworks display gone wrong. The air was filled with smoke, but no one was dying. The Ogume boys, realizing their advantage, charged forward. They had no guns, only their heavy wooden staffs. But a stick in the hand of a brave man is better than a cannon in the hand of a coward. They swung their staffs with the strength of farmers who wrestle with the earth daily. Crack! A staff connected with a shoulder. Third. Another hit a knee. The headsmen, terrified by these bulletproof demons, began to scramble. The Ogume boys fought with the fury of betrayed trust. They knocked the rifles out of the hands of the attackers. For a moment, it seemed they would win. For a moment, it seemed the legend would end in victory. But numbers, my children, are a cruel thing. There were 24 Ogume boys, but there were over 50 headsmen hiding in the bush and among the cattle. Seeing that their guns were useless, the headsmen changed their tactics. If bullets could not bite, they would use steel. They drew their long daggers and heavy cutlasses, weapons sharp enough to shave hair. The battle turned into a chaotic brawl. The Ogume boys were brave, but they were surrounded. The charm protected them from the high speed of bullets, but the heavy, hacking blows of cutlasses were different. The magic was strained. The headsmen swarmed them like bees. 3 headsmen to 1 boy. They grabbed their arms, their legs, pulling them down to the asphalt. The leader shouted orders, trying to keep his brothers together. Back to back. Stay together. But the chaos was too great. The headsmen were ferocious. They realized that while the boys were hard to kill, they could still be hurt by the sheer weight of blows. The first Ogume boy fell, overwhelmed by 5 attackers who pinned him down. He cried out, not from a bullet, but from the crushing weight of bodies. The tide of the battle turned dark. The immunity to bullets had bought them time, but it had not bought them immortality against being overpowered. One by one, the brave 24 were dragged down. They fought like lions, kicking and striking, but the swarm was endless. The headsmen were relentless, driven by the fear of what would happen if these spirit boys survived. The leader watched in horror as his friends, his brothers, were subdued. He saw the headsmen using their knives now, testing the skin of the boys. While the bullets had bounced off, the magic had limits. Under the relentless sawing and hacking of heavy blades, and the crushing blows of stones, the protection began to wane for the others. Blood finally touched the road. It was red and bright, shocking against the black tar. The scream of a dying youth pierced the air, louder than the gunshots. Then another scream. And another. The headsmen, realizing the boys could bleed if struck hard enough and often enough with cold steel, went into a frenzy. It was a massacre. The 23 brave guardians were silenced, their bodies left broken on the lonely road. Now, only one remained. The leader. The 19-year-old with the double fortification. He stood alone in the center of the carnage. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild with grief and rage. He was surrounded by the enemy. They formed a circle around him, wary, keeping their distance. They had seen him take the most bullets. They had seen him fight the hardest. The headsmen raised their guns again, frustrated. Bang! 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 A dozen rifles fired at him simultaneously. The force of the impact lifted him off his feet and threw him backward. He rolled on the asphalt like a rag doll. The headsmen cheered, thinking he was finished. They lowered their weapons and walked toward the body. But as the smoke cleared, the boy stood up. He shook his head, dusty and bruised, but unbroken. There was not a single hole in him. He looked at them, his eyes glowing with a terrifying light. He slammed his fist against his chest. Clang! It sounded like a hammer hitting an iron gate. He was not just resistant, he was impenetrable. The headsmen took a step back, fear gripping their throats again. They rushed him with machetes. Blades flashed in the sun, striking his neck, his arms, his back. But the blades bounced off. The double fortification held. The native doctor had done his work too well. The boy was impervious to cuts. The steel weapons dulled against his skin. He fought back, swinging his fist, grabbing the attackers and throwing them aside. He began to chant. It was a single word, shouted over and over, a cry to his ancestors and a taunt to his enemies. Quick! 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 The sound echoed through the forest. It was the sound of a spirit that refused to leave. The headsmen were terrified. They had killed the others, but this one was a demon. They tackled him, 10 men jumping on him at once, pinning his arms and legs to the ground. They tried to slit his throat, but the knife slid uselessly over his skin. They tried to stab his heart, but the dagger bent. The boy just lay there, pinned but alive, looking up at the sky, chanting his song. Quick! He was mocking their weakness. He was showing them the power of Ogume. The headsmen were desperate. They were exhausted. They stood over the boy, panting, covered in sweat and the blood of his fallen brothers. They spoke rapidly in their language, gesturing wildly. What is this thing? They seemed to ask. How do we kill it? They knew they could not leave him alive. If he returned to the village, he would bring a war that would wipe them out. Then, one of the older herdsmen pointed to the forest. He pointed to the massive bull that had been leading the herd. It was a beast of nightmares, huge, with muscles that rippled under its skin, and horns that were long, thick, and pointed like spears. It was an animal of raw, brute force. A wicked idea formed in their minds. If the weapons of man, gunpowder and steel, could not pierce this boy, perhaps the weapons of nature could. The bull possessed a strength that no charm was designed to withstand. It was not a bullet, it was a living battering ram. 2 herdsmen ran into the bush to retrieve the beast. The leader of the Ogume boys, still pinned to the ground, saw the animal approaching. For the first time, his chant faltered. The bull was agitated, its eyes rolling, its breath coming in snorts of steam. The herdsman prodded it, making it angry. 5 men held the animal, positioning it so its horns pointed directly at the boy. Another group of herdsmen lifted the 19-year-old leader. He struggled, he kicked, but there were too many hands holding him. They carried him like a log towards the angry bull. Let us see if your juju works against this, one of them sneered. With a unified heave, they slammed the boy's body onto the sharp points of the bull's horns. Thud! The boy groaned. The skin held. The charm was fighting the pressure. But they did not stop. They pulled him back and slammed him again. And again. They used his body as a battering ram against the bone spears of the animal. The bull, furious at being struck, tossed its head violently, adding its own immense strength to the impact. The boy grit his teeth, the pain immense as the pressure mounted on his internal organs. He was iron on the outside, but inside, he was still human. It took 5 tries. On the 5th impact, the sheer force overwhelmed the supernatural barrier. The horn found a weak point, or perhaps the ancestors simply looked away in sorrow. There was a sickening squelch as the thick horn pierced the boy's abdomen. The charm shattered. The leak had happened. The bull, sensing the victory, huffed and tossed its head upwards. The brave leader was thrown into the air, his body finally broken. He hit the ground with a wet thud. He was bleeding now. The blood that had been denied to the bullets poured out freely for the beast. The boy curled up, clutching his stomach, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The headsman stood back, watching. They waited to see if he would rise again. But the boy did not stand. The bull, still in a rage, moved forward and began to stomp on him. Its heavy hoofs crashed down on the boy's ribs, his legs, his chest. The headsman watched with cruel satisfaction, clicking their tongues, urging the animal on. They let the beast do what they could not. When the bull was finally pulled away, the boy was barely unrecognizable. But the headsman, fearful of his power, wanted to be absolutely sure. They did not trust that he was dead. They had seen him survive too much. They found a large, heavy stone by the roadside, a rock used to chop the wheels of timber trucks. One of the headsmen lifted the heavy stone high above his head. He walked over to where the boy lay gasping his final breath. With a grunt of exertion, he brought the stone down on the boy's skull. Crack! The movement stopped. The chanting stopped. The quick was silenced forever. The leader of the Ogume Guardians, the boy who could not be shot, lay dead on the desolate road. The sun beat down on the massacre. The headsmen, exhausted and shaken by the ordeal, did not celebrate. They dragged the bodies of the 24 into the bushes, trying to hide their crime. They rounded up their cattle and fled into the deep forest, leaving the road silent once more. It was hours later when a motorcycle rider came down that lonely road. He was carrying a passenger, a young man returning from the city. They saw the blood on the asphalt first. It was not just a spot, it was a river that had dried black in the sun. Then they saw the dragged marks leading into the bush. The rider stopped his bike. His hands were shaking. "Did you see that?" he whispered. The passenger nodded, his heart pounding in his throat. They crept toward the bushes, patting the tall grass. The smell hit them before the sight. The metallic scent of fresh slaughter. There, in the clearing, lay the flower of Ogume's youth. 24 bodies. Dismembered. Broken. The passenger recognized the face of the leader, the boy in the torn Brazil jersey. He fell to his knees and vomited. The horror was too great for the human mind to process. An entire generation of protectors, wiped out in a single afternoon. The news traveled back to Ogume not by phone, but by the wailing of the wind. When the motorcycle rider sped back to the village and told the king, the sound that rose from Ogume was not a cry, it was a howl. It was the sound of a mother wolf who has lost her cubs. Every market stall closed. Every farm was abandoned. The women threw themselves in the dust, tearing their clothes. The men, faces grim and terrifying, sharpened their machetes, but there was no one left to fight. The headsmen had vanished into the endless wilderness. They brought the bodies home. All 24 of them. They laid them in the village square at Ogbio. For 14 days, no drum was beaten, no song was sung. The entire village painted their foreheads with white ash, the mark of deep mourning. The sky over Ogume remained grey, as if the sun itself was ashamed to shine on such a tragedy. But as they buried their sons, a change came over the people of Ogume. The grief turned into something else. It turned into power. The elders gathered again, not for peace this time, but for permanence. They took the blood-soaked earth from where the boys had fallen. They took the amulets that had worked so well against the bullets. They concocted a new charm. A voodoo so powerful it terrified even those who made it. They used the sacrifice of the 24 to seal the boundaries of the community. They walked the perimeter of Ogume, pouring libations, chanting the names of the fallen boys. Emeka, Tiga, F, and the brave leader. Never again, the king declared. No enemy shall cross this line and live. The boundary was set. It was invisible to the eye, but to the spirit, it was a wall of fire. The village was declared a no-go area for any herdsman or invader with evil in his heart. And the charm worked. My children, this is not just a story, it is history. From that day forward, strange reports began to spread. Any herdsman who tried to cross into Ogume with a weapon would suddenly fall ill. Some would drop dead within 30 minutes, foaming at the mouth with no one touching them. Others would become confused, walking in circles until the villagers found them. The cows of the intruders would refuse to cross the boundary. They would stop and bellow, sensing the spiritual barrier. If forced across, the cattle would die. The news spread across the Delta, across the Niger, all the way to the north. Stay away from Ogume, the travelers whispered. The land there eats its enemies. The swiremen packed their bags and left. The settlements in neighboring towns emptied. Ogume became an island of safety in a turbulent region. The sacrifice of the 24 had bought an eternal security for their people. They had died so that their mothers and sisters would never have to run again. Years have passed since that day. The rain has washed the blood from the asphalt of the silent mile. The grass has grown over the spot where the boys were ambushed. But if you go there today, you will feel it. The air is always colder on that stretch of road. The birds do not sing there. Travelers who drive past say that sometimes, out of the corner of their eye, they see young men standing by the roadside. 24 of them. Watching. Waiting. They hold big sticks, and the leader wears a faded jersey. They are the eternal sentries. They are the ghosts who refuse to leave their post. The motorcycle riders know. They honk their horns when they pass, a sign of respect to the fallen. Greetings, brothers, they say in their hearts. We are safe because you stood. So, my children, when you walk through our village and see the peace we enjoy, do not take it for granted. When you eat the yam from our soil, remember what watered the ground. We are not just a village, we are a fortress built on the bones of heroes. The world is full of wicked men and flying bullets. But here in Ogume, we have something stronger than iron. We have the memory of the 24. We have the boy who defied the gun and forced the enemy to use a beast. Remember their names. Tell their story. As long as we remember, the burial holds. As long as we remember, the sacrifice is not in vain. Now, go to sleep, but keep one ear open to the wind. You might just hear them whispering. Quick! Quick, protecting us from the dark.